The Chicago Fire released more renderings of the proposed new stadium that they want to build on the 78. By the looks of it, you got the feeling that the Chicago White Sox are going to have to shift to another site for a new stadium. Let's discuss on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. Thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, the Chicago Fire made the next step after they called dibs on the vacant land known as the 78 that White Sox owner Jerry Reinsdorf wanted to build his new stadium on. And new renderings are out, and just having a vision of it makes you think there is no chance both teams are sharing that land, or could they? Let's discuss in the first segment. Then let's go over what the latest mock drafts have the White Sox possibly going with the number 10 pick in next month's draft. And finally, let's address Boston fans acting like they're so tortured and how it's insulting to the true tortured fan base, us White Sox fans. All right, so the Chicago Fire took another step in making sure it's clear the 78 is theirs. I mean, they called dibs, and they're definitely moving forward. The team unveiled more renderings of the 22,000-seat privately funded stadium owner Joe Mansueto wants to build for his club. It's going to cost an estimated $650 million of his own money to finally develop what will be then the 78th neighborhood in Chicago. Because remember, the 78 has been sitting vacant for, I believe, almost 50 years. And it's gone through many different owners of land. The guy that I believe currently owns, I remember I did an episode on, kind of has ties to Saddam Hussein, although he denied it. And again, it was just a different type of thing when Iraq was going through its revolution, obviously, and he did go into exile, that type of stuff. But obviously, it's been just a crazy piece of land that's just been sitting vacant that they are trying to develop. Related Midwest has been trying to develop in the 78. So obviously now the Fire, they're moving forward. And when you look at this rendering and that the Chicago Sun-Times published courtesy of the land's developer, Related Midwest, and I've got the image up for those watching on YouTube. I'll try to paint the imaginary picture for those listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. It's basically you've got the stadium sitting right in the middle of the land on the 9 acres that is proposed that it's going to need to build on. Then to the right, you got a whole bunch of, mini skyscrapers, same on the left. So you're probably assuming that that's condos, apartment buildings, office space, that type of stuff, retail on both sides. So, and Brendan Chagru of, Bears Wire, I love how he put, for those watching on YouTube, you can see Soldier Field off in the distance. And I know he tweeted that it's basically like the scorned lover, because how, the Fire are leaving Soldier Field to build this privately funded stadium that they will own and control. So you got to wonder, how the heck are those teams going to share the land like what is still sort of being floated? Especially if you're Related Midwest, why would you sacrifice more office, condo, and retail space? However, I would not put the full RIP on the Sox and the Fire sharing the land just yet. First, look at this rendering Related Midwest had when the Sox proposed park came out. It pretty much, I'm not saying that they, copied anything on that. Obviously, the architects did different stuff, but it's basically the same. The Sox ballpark is right in the middle of the proposed development of the rest of Related Midwest. And also, I will say this: if you're Related Midwest, maybe you might want to maximize more bar and hotel development. It's just a suggestion. This is me playing, armchair, economist. If you have the White Sox playing 81 home games during obviously prime Chicagoans wanting to get outside, instead of just these 17 and some change home games the Fire have. Because, the Fire only play 17 home games. They obviously can host international friendlies. They can also host, other like Premier Leagues coming in to have friendlies concerts, they are floating that. But if you think about it, by my calculation, though, if you did split the land, that's 98 dates to draw people to whatever else you develop entertainment-wise. Although, again, do you want a more of a neighborhood? That's just one of the things that, would have to be sorted out. If you think about it, with condo and office space, sometimes, can take a while to fill up, especially with some companies still doing work from home. Maybe you might want to go with, having these two, entertainment sports teams that can draw people into the rest of the infrastructure that you would develop. But one thing keeps being clear that I took from the Chicago Sun-Times write-up: more private money will have to be kicked in from the White Sox if they want to split the land. So first, here's the White Sox official stance on the 78. When Chief Revenue Marketing Officer Brooks Boyer, he was on 670 The Scores Inside the Clubhouse last week. Quote, when you look at the 72-acre parcel like that, and the Fire are going to build a beautiful stadium on 9 acres, there's plenty of room for a lot of things that can happen, Boyer said. Certainly 2 stadiums can fit on that property. As far as where the stadium goes, I don't think it matters as long as fans can get in and out there and enjoy their games and events, end quote. Now, the Sun-Times' Mitchell Armentrout had this in his piece today. The soccer stadium calculus would change if the Sox elbowed their way onto the 78, as Reinsdorf publicly pitched last year. The Southsiders weren't able to win over state lawmakers for public funding to help build a new diamond as taxpayers continue paying off Reed Field. But just days after Mansueto announced his 78 bid, the Sox announced a potential transition of controlling ownership to billionaire Justin Ishbia, who could put more skin in the game for a ballpark, as lawmakers have urged the team to do. While local alderman Pat Dowell of the 3rd has said she doesn't think there's room for 2 stadiums, the Fire aren't shutting the door on the idea. Quote, we're really excited about being the anchor tenant, and we're excited about the private commitment that Joe's making to catalyze the 78, Baldwin said. That said, if once we're open and down the road, the White Sox figure out that that's where they want to be long-term, and they want to have a conversation around it, and it makes sense for both teams, and it makes sense for the community members, and it makes sense for the city of Chicago and both fan bases, then I think we'll be open to sitting down then. But right now, we're really focused on our project and making sure that we keep the course, end quote. Also remember, the 78 does come with $450 million in TIF funding for infrastructure. So there is some public money already built in. I think that's one of the reasons why Jerry really wanted to target 78, because it does come with basically already $450 million in those tax incremental funding districts. And then let's say you do get Jerry kicking in $200 million of his own cash as like a legacy. And there is precedent for that. Herb Cole, on his way out the door, and I know I'm mentioning Milwaukee, but on his way out the door of owning the Milwaukee Bucks, promised $100 million towards the construction of Fiserv Forum. So if that's the case, and Ishbia's bill, on what I recall being an estimated $1.9 billion to $2 billion, and that could go down depending on how much the Fire cut into the developmental land, Justin Ishbia is looking at a $1.25 billion bill. And considering he's worth around $4 to $5 billion, he could probably foot that bill. However, if he decides he wants to be the main tenant on land, on a different land development, Armentrout and his colleague Franz Spielman did a great job on June 5th suggesting the former Michael Reese Hospital site. This is what they write. Unless Ishbia is willing to remain at Wright Field, the 34-year-old publicly owned stadium at 35th and Shields that Reinsdorf has wanted to jettison, he's likely to consider one of the 2 megasites, the South Loop parcel known as the 78th, or the old Michael Reese Hospital site in Brownsville. The Chicago Fire have first dibs on the 78 at Roosevelt and Clark, having announced this week that billionaire owner Joe Mansueto has agreed to build a $650 million privately financed soccer-only stadium on 9 acres there. The developers of the Reese site recently tried to lure the Bears with a Hail Mary proposal to build a stadium with an expansive lawn extending over DuSable Lake Shore Drive, but the Bears have dismissed the site as too narrow and having turned their focus to Arlington Heights. After striking out with the Bears, Reese developers set their sights on the Sox and the stars of the National Women's Soccer League. So, and then, they go on to how state representatives and aldermen think that the Reese site would be great for the White Sox. Although in that piece, they, Spielman and, they talk about the Sox could potentially move to Nashville. All right. I think people who keep floating that move are doing a terrible job of when they speculate that. And yeah, I'll call that out. And I remember it was like Shy Sox Fan Nation. They had a terrible piece on that too. And I will call it out as a terrible piece, because if you're going to speculate all the way through, because they leave out the speculation that MLB would likely make a lot more money if they just expand there. An expansion fee in Nashville is more lucrative than taking a team out of the 3rd biggest market, even if it's shared. Plus, there are still sites to build a new ballpark in Chicago. It's just how much will eventual new majority owner Justin Ishbia want to pay for it. Well, figuring out the stadium situation is pivotal to the team's long-term success. However, this year's draft is also pivotal, and it's less than a month away. So let's discuss some players the team has been tied to in the latest mock drafts, and that's next on Locked On White Sox. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trade, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for the trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. And I keep telling my brother-in-law, he's in the plumbing business. Tell your company, use Supply House. Tons of advantages they provide to the skilled trades. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you're not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so I'm only mentioning the mock drafts because when it comes to MLB mock drafts, if you do get a guru in the know and they mention a player, it might be because they actually heard said prospect is tied to the team. Because remember, I've had James Fox from Future Sox on the show a bunch of times pointing this out. And again, if you even read the book Moneyball, it's pretty much still the process of how teams compile their board and what they do when they zero in on draft targets. Teams tend to usually have a list of guys, usually probably 3 or 4 guys that they really, really like. They zero in on, and they start reaching out to said prospects or their prospects representation to just get an idea of how much the bonus will be. And then economics tends to play in a role of who they will actually take. Although I hate that. I hate when teams try to, put in economics into that because I firmly believe in rounds 1 through 5, basically your top 150 picks, there should be no price tag. Take the best players available. And if you have to overslot them, overslot them. Because again, if you look at, even the top 200, because in baseball, you can extend out to about 200 players that have a chance to be very, very good. Because think about the hypothesis. Think about all the 50 states. You still get a lot of good, you can have a lot of good baseball players in each state, maybe a few, in the East and the Midwest, but there's still some very good baseball players. And then look at, the rich talent in California where they can play baseball year round, in Florida and Texas and all that stuff. So there's viable players. And out of that, you can draw from, there's top players in high school and college. You mix that in, you have a huge universe. So go with the best players available early because they've got probably the best shot to be very good Major League Baseball players. Obviously, it's still an unknown. It's a crapshoot. It's a projection. But overslot them there. And then where you can at least save some money is you go with pitching and college bats in round 6 through 18. Then they still have one of the following solid grades or production in terms of bats. They've got a good solid grade or production when it comes to power, bat to ball, or speed. Because again, those guys you can take some of those traits and develop them into decent players. Otherwise, just go pitching. And then, take 2 high school kids, likely destined for college in rounds 19 and 20, and see if you maybe do have leftover money. See if you can convince them to skip college. If you have a little leftover money, to be like, hey, I got 250 left over in my bonus pool money. Because remember, the bonus pool is just an allotment. It's just figurative money. They can spend it, and you can spend a little bit more, but then obviously you lose, bonus pool money the next year. But basically what I described is sort of what the White Sox did in last year's draft. And I like the process that they followed. Now, obviously passing on Jack Caglione might be a regret, but hey, I too was scared of another potential Andrew Vaughn experience. So that's why I'm not hammering the White Sox for passing on Caglione and going with the pitcher Hagen Smith. We just went through a terrible experience where the White Sox with a top 5 pick took a first baseman who clearly busted a minus 1.8 WAR career for the White Sox, one of the worst ever. So I get that. But still, MLB mock drafts, obviously they can be wrong as others, but if there's a name listed, it probably means the team has them on their list. Keyword probably, because you still get some guys and gals still doing mock drafts based on what they think the team should do. And that's kind of what this cottage industry sometimes is when you get these, prospect gurus when it comes to all the NFL, NHL, and MLB mocks. You get also, guys and gals with their personal bias and rather realizing, teams' boards matter more. This is probably what the team's board thinks than, hey, this is what they should do based on their, needs, that type of stuff. But this draft is pivotal if this build is going to work. And I talked about on last Thursday's show with Jack Ankeny of Sports Illustrated, talked about on last Tuesday's show with James Fox of Future Sox. It is so important that they get this draft right. Although, full disclosure, make sure to pay attention to the YouTube page for any draft reaction July 13th and 14th. I'm actually going to be in Disney World that week. I'm going to go on my family vacation during the All-Star break, but I will be recording shorts for reactions while I'm gone. I'm cooking up some great interviews with some great guests, looking back on the 2005 World Series run. So just to let you know. So anyways, let's get back to the mock drafts and throw out some names. So MLB.com's Jim Callis, he has the Sox taking prep shortstop JoJo Parker at number 10, and here's what he writes. Prep shortstops are the strongest part of this draft, and the White Sox will tap into that. Unless Willett somehow gets to number 10, they'll pounce on Parker, who might offer the best combination of hitting ability and power in that demographic. Whoever gets Parker may try to grab his twin brother Jacob, a slugging outfielder, with their next selection. Casey Cunningham is another prep shortstop option if Parker goes higher, while Tennessee middle infielder Gavin Killen might be the top college candidates. So we got Parker, and I've seen that. Kylie McDaniel also agrees the Sox could take Parker, and CBSSports.com's Mike Axia, he also has the Sox taking Parker. And then in terms of McDaniel, he didn't really list any other names, although he had this to say when he did his write-up. For some teams, the top tier is 10 players. I basically agree, although I might include one or two more. So the White Sox pick could be quite simple, but odds are their board doesn't just have all 10 names in similar order. So basically what he's saying is Parker would be the guy that's left over. There's 10 really good prospects. Obviously not generational, obviously not as exciting as the 2026 draft, but there's still 10 very good prospects. And the White Sox just get the guy that's left over. And if it's JoJo Parker, I'd actually be happy. Although, if anyone has Colson Montgomery fear, one, it's still an unknown if he's going to be a bust. Two, it's still good process to always draft up the middle of the field. As James Fox, he was on the show recently, and he talked about Parker having a great hit, profile. And there's nothing wrong with drafting a high school prep shortstop. Yes, they may take a little bit longer. But let's say he doesn't have the injury problems that Colson had, and it takes him 3 years. He's up when he's 21. And if club control is still 6 years, you've got 6 years of him being in his prime years. And let's say Justin Ishbia is now the owner. He maybe extends him. You suddenly have an exciting shortstop. There's nothing wrong with taking that, gamble. Baseball America has the Sox taking prep shortstop Billy Carlson. The Athletics' Keith Law has the Sox taking UC Santa Barbara pitcher Tyler Bremner, and this is what he writes. Bremner is the other name who's moved up a lot, and he's mostly recovered from a bad start to the year and posted some fantastic numbers over the season's final month. He came into the year with a ton of hype as a top college righty in the draft, so there's an argument that this would be an excellent value for the spot. I believe they'd take any of these college lefties over him if they got there. I've also heard them with Steele Hall and Cruz Schoolcraft. I don't think Seth Hernandez would get past this spot. So, again, a few other names besides Bremner. Although I did see James Fox tweet out last week that Bremner doesn't have good extension on his pitches, and that's something the Sox value. And then also just looking at the Sox history of taking pitchers in the first round under Mike Shirley, who is the amateur scouting director, he tends to go with power lefties instead. So I'm not sure he's going to go with a righty that early. Just Baseball's Tyler Jennings and Connor Dorney, they have Tennessee pitcher Liam Doyle falling to number 10. Again, that would be another fireballing lefty, which on one hand would seem redundant and maybe not as thrilling, again, like last year's take of Hagen Smith. And again, they need prospect bats. But again, if they take a pitcher, they showed last year's process, they can just double back and grab a guy like a Caleb Bonemer with a high ceiling. On the other hand, if he falls too, if Doyle falls, it would be great value. as just stated, Mike Shirley, first of all, loves him some power lefties. Doyle is considered, I've seen him as high as the third best prospect, one of the top pitching prospects. So if he falls, that would be great. And this organization actually does a great job of developing them, despite the stereotype that the White Sox don't develop prospects. They don't develop hitters. That will be the one thing I will preach. The White Sox have struggled to develop hitters. Pitching, they've been doing a good job at. You got to give them the kudos, even though it can be hard. And also right now, you can never have enough left-handed pitching, as this organization currently doesn't have a lefty in the rotation. USA Today's Gabe Lackeys, I probably butchered his name, has the Sox taking Texas A&M's Chase Laviolette. On one hand, that would probably be making up for passing on Caglione last year. However, Laviolette is much more volatile than Caglione. And I'm not sure I would like that pick with Jerry Reinsdorf still being the owner through 2029, as this build does need first-round picks that you want high ceilings, obviously, but they still have to get to the big leagues. They have to produce their big league players through the draft, because Jerry doesn't go into the free agent market and pay for guys to help upgrade the roster. So that's another reason why they have to hit in this draft. And Laviolette, yeah, while he's got great potential to crush the ball a country mile in almost every game, he's got high strikeout. And if you look at how his average plummeted, and again, average in college usually doesn't matter. But if it plummets like it did for him, then it matters. That's a huge red flag. So I don't know if I would go with him. All right, so let's switch over to how hard it is to have sympathy for Boston fans acting like they're so tortured. Because again, I just talked about how a draft is so pivotal for an organization because this team doesn't spend money. Red Sox, guys, they do. They just happen to trade a disgruntled superstar. So let's talk about that after the break. If you're running a business and you know that every missed call is money left on the table. So think about the last time you had a service emergency, like a bursted pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, did you wait? No, you called the next one. That is why having a reliable business line is so important. And that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or computer. And I got some friends and family who own their own business, and you best believe I'm telling them about how OpenPhone can help their business. Like if you're juggling 2 phones just to keep business and personal calls separate, OpenPhone solves that instantly. Your whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox. So no more, hey, who's handling that? OpenPhone is offering Locked On White Sox customers, Locked On White Sox listeners, 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnMLB. That's OpenPhone.com/LockedOnMLB. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over and no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, or whether they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. So I do try to stay out of other teams' businesses, as first of all, this is a White Sox focused show. I mean, I do have to get better sometimes at being more tolerant when, other fans make comments on our YouTube page or even on the TikTok page. But especially when they make comments like, oh, I can't believe this poverty franchise or blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking to you. Sorry. I mean, I do appreciate anybody that does subscribe because they want to check on how a dumpster fire organization operates. And I have had people make those comments, and those are great comments. Like, hey, I check in on the show because, I just want to see wow, it can be worse. And I'm here to, like I said, I get paid to tell you it can be worse. So I've got no problem with that. It's just when you put my team in your mouth without having no context and just sounding out of town stupid, that's what drives me nuts. And there's nothing worse than dealing with out of town stupid comments. For example, I got this Yankee fan jumping into my TikTok comments about how I said Noah Schultz could be the next Randy Johnson. It's just crazy. And another guy, oh, that's a bold take. It's not a bold take. First of all, if you knew what I was talking about, he's 6'11" and a lefty. And there have been natural comparisons to being Randy Johnson with his stuff. And I'm not the only one to compare him to the big unit. It's just natural. It's not, John Rosh was compared as the next Randy Johnson. Basically, anybody who's 6'11" gets compared to Randy Johnson because he's the only tall pitcher to ever be that dominant. Chris Young was okay. Okay? It's not a hot take. It's called logic. And what I've found is Boston Red Sox, and especially Yankees fans, they don't have any logic. They don't. They're just a bunch of hot take guys. It's hot take city. And I got to accept that. But when I see the Boston Red Sox fans base just crying about the Rafael Devers trade, like Jared Carabas of Underdog Fantasy and like 6 other publications, go with this viral tweet after the Rafael Devers trade. This is what he tweets at Jared_Carabas. No team makes it harder to root for them than the Boston Red Sox. Give me a break. Just stop. Just stop. Yeah, you know, and I've seen Yankees fans. Oh, we haven't won a World Series since 1999. How? Or 2009. How shall we ever move on? You're not tortured. You're just not, especially Boston fans. You act like the curse of the Bambino is still going on when your franchise has already won 4 World Series titles this century. Sorry that they weren't back-to-back. And yes, I'm putting you on call-out because New England, stop. Just stop. You've had 6 Super Bowls from the Patriots this century, 4 titles from the Red Sox, 2 from the Boston Celtics, and 2 from the Bruins. That's 14 titles by my math. So you're not tortured when your team trades away 2 superstar players because in some cases they didn't want to pay them, like Mookie Betts. Try being a White Sox fan. That's been my fan experience for 42 years, where the team trading away top-tier talent because basically they don't want to pay them. That's called the offseason tradition. You actually have one of our pitchers, Boston, Garrett Crochet, in part because the owner didn't want to pay him that massive contract. Just saying. Try being a Chicago fan, where, yeah, we got pride, but we've also suffered through some of the worst championship droughts ever. 88 years for the White Sox, 108 for the Cubs, 49 for the Blackhawks, and we're still wandering the championship wilderness for the Bears and the Bulls. And you could say, well, you had Michael Jordan. And yes, in the 1990s, we had Michael Jordan, and that was great. And since then, before Michael Jordan, the Bulls were barely relevant. And after Michael Jordan, the Bulls are a joke. I mean, the 85 Bears are still celebrated as if they won the Super Bowl last season. And I don't want to get into this which fan base is more tortured arguments, but Boston fans just keep acting like what Junior Soprano once said about Tony's mother in an episode of Sopranos. They're basically walking around carrying a Virginia ham crying because they got no bread. All right? Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. I'll be back tomorrow with a Way Back Wednesday segment. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding more updates on the Chicago White Sox pursuit of a new stadium, draft prospects the team is tied to in next month's draft, and Boston fans acting so tortured that I don't think they can handle being a Chicago fan. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.